Claire Sinclair had a picturesque life, a loving husband named David, a delightful toddler named Lily, and a job as a junior architect. Despite the blessings, the stress of city life in Chicago was wearing her thin. She longed for a quiet, undisturbed weekend, a getaway from the hustle and bustle. "I found a place," David said one evening, holding up his tablet. "An old vintage home in the countryside. Perfect reviews. The host is a nice old lady, Miss Evelyn. This might just be what you need, Claire." The vintage home's photo displayed an elegant two-storied structure nestled amidst towering trees. It seemed too good to be true. They booked it without a second thought. The drive to the countryside was smooth, the scenery shifting from skyscrapers to endless stretches of green. When they reached the listed address, the sun was beginning to sink, casting long, eerie shadows. The home was just as they had seen in the photos, only a tad bit creepier in the diminishing light. Claire's apprehension grew when they were greeted not by an old lady, but by a middle-aged man, his skin weathered and his eyes darting nervously. "Ah, you must be the Sinclairs," he rasped. "I'm John, Evelyn's son. Mom's been under the weather, so I'm handling things for now." Despite the slight unease, they followed John into the house. Claire noticed a distinct coldness inside, though she brushed it off as a result of the home's vintage nature. As John showed them around, Claire couldn't shake off the feeling that his eyes lingered on her for a bit too long. That night, as they settled into their bedroom, Claire whispered her concerns to David. "There's something off about John, I feel it." David laughed softly. "City life has made you a little paranoid. He's just a bit socially awkward, that's all." Claire wasn't convinced but chose to put her worries to rest for the sake of the trip. The next morning, they explored the surrounding woods. Lily was in her element, giggling and chasing butterflies. The day was going perfectly until Claire stumbled upon a discarded newspaper half buried in the dirt. The headline sent chills down her spine. "Local man escapes prison. Convicted murderer on the loose." Below the bold letters was a mugshot of John, looking just as menacing. Panic welled up in her. She remembered the photos of Evelyn on the Airbnb page, the sweet old woman she was expecting to meet. Instead, they were introduced to this imposter, a convict posing as her son. What had he done to Evelyn? Heart pounding, Claire rushed back to the house. As she approached, she overheard John speaking on the phone. "No, they don't suspect a thing. Yes, everything's going as planned." Claire's worst fears were materializing. She found David, pulled him aside, and showed him the newspaper clipping. His face drained of color. "We need to leave now," he whispered. But as they packed their bags in haste, they heard a sharp cry from the living room. "Lily?" Rushing downstairs, they found John holding a terrified Lily. His face contorted into a sinister grin. "Leaving so soon?" David's eyes darted between John and Lily, his voice trembling. "Please, she's just a child. If you need to hurt someone, hurt me. Let my family go." John stared at Lily for a long, tense moment. The innocence in her eyes seemed to penetrate his hardened exterior. With a heavy sigh, he pushed Lily towards them. "Go," he rasped, remorse evident in his eyes. "For the child." As they sped away from the house, David called the police. Within minutes, the house was swarming with officers. The aftermath was harrowing. They learned that Evelyn was found tied up in the basement, alive but traumatized. John had impersonated her, hacked into her Airbnb account, and continued to host unsuspecting guests. The chilling realization was that they weren't his first victims. The Sinclairs were grateful to be alive, but the trauma lingered. The dream of a peaceful family getaway turned into their worst nightmare. For weeks after, Claire would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, images of that day replaying in her mind. Every shadow, every unfamiliar sound made her jump. One evening, a letter arrived. It was written in shaky handwriting. Opening it, Claire's eyes widened. It was from Evelyn. The letter read, "I'm so deeply sorry for what you and your family endured. It was never my intention for anyone to be harmed in my home. I'm in therapy now, trying to process the trauma. John was my estranged son, battling his own demons. The police informed me that they believe he had acted alone. They've increased patrols in the area. Please know I'll do everything to ensure this horror never repeats. Thank you for your bravery. and I hope one day you find peace." The Sinclairs clung to each other, finding solace in the fact that they had survived, and in the hope that time would mend their shattered mirrors. Derek's life had once been filled with laughter and the simple joys of creating art. He hailed from Asheville, a small town tucked away in the rolling hills of North Carolina. As a child, he would often get lost in sketching the Blue Ridge Mountains, finding solace in the peace they offered. But when tragedy struck, the sudden death of his young wife in a car accident, Derek's world came crashing down. The scenic beauty that once inspired him now only reminded him of what he had lost. To make matters worse, Derek's creative spark had dulled. The canvases lay untouched, and the paintbrushes dried out. The weight of grief bore heavily on him. To try and recapture the old zest for life, and primarily to break free from the shadows of his past, he decided to relocate to New York City. The city's vibrancy and ever-evolving skyline promised a fresh start and perhaps a new muse. Months after his move, Derek still felt adrift. His art still remained elusive, a distant memory of brighter days. On the recommendation of a fellow artist, Derek decided to book a luxurious penthouse suite via Airbnb. The suite, perched high above Manhattan, offered a panoramic view of the city's iconic skyline. It was said that many artists had stayed there, drawing inspiration from its lofty heights. The first day in the penthouse felt like a dream. The city stretched out below, a sea of lights and possibilities. Derek felt a stirring in his soul, something he hadn't felt in a long while. The suite seemed to be working its magic. However, as night descended, so did a shroud of unease. Derek's phone rang, the sharp trill breaking the silence of the night. He answered, expecting maybe a call from the building's concierge or a wrong number. "Is she with you?" A gruff, intoxicated voice sneered on the other end. Confused, Derek replied, "Who? I think you've got the wrong number. Don't play games with me. I know she moved on and you're with her now." The voice grew angrier and more desperate. Unsettled, Derek hung up, attributing the call to some drunk, misty-old person. He settled into bed, hoping for a good night's sleep. But the calls continued. Night after night, Derek's phone would ring at odd hours. The voice would alternate between pleading and threatening, always demanding to know about her. Derek's paranoia grew. One night, fueled by terror and exhaustion, Derek decided to confront the caller. "Who are you? Why are you tormenting me?" The caller laughed, a cold and hollow sound. "She was mine, and now she's with you. In that penthouse. You think you can take her from me?" Derek's heart raced. Could this person be the angry ex of the previous renter? But why target him? He had no ties, no relations to anyone from the city. Derek tried to reason with him. "I don't know who you're talking about. I'm just here on my own, looking for some inspiration." But the voice cut him off. "I've seen you with her. Enjoy your time while it lasts, because soon it'll be over." With that chilling promise, the calls became more sinister. He contemplated leaving the penthouse, but a stubborn determination held him back. This was his sanctuary, the only place that brought him close to this art after his wife's demise. He wouldn't let this twisted individual drag him away. One evening, as Derek was trying to drown out the fear with some wine, there was a loud bang on his door. Panic surged through him. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter and approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, Derek saw a disheveled man, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The man was murmuring something, pressing his ear to the door as if trying to catch sounds from within. Derek dialed 911 immediately, relaying his situation. But as he spoke, the pounding on the door intensified. The intruder was screaming now, "Give her back! Give her back to me!" The minutes felt like hours, but soon the wailing of sirens grew louder. Derek could hear shouting and a brief scuffle outside. Then silence. The police had apprehended the man. He was indeed the vengeful ex of the penthouse's previous tenant. In his delusional state, fueled by alcohol and bitterness, he had mistaken Derek for his ex's new lover. The shock of the events took a toll on Derek. He moved out of the penthouse the next day. However, New York had one final twist in store for him. As he was packing, he found an old, faded photograph tucked behind a drawer. It was the picture of a woman, strikingly beautiful. She seemed familiar, yet Derek couldn't place her. On showing it to the building concierge while leaving, the man's face paled. That's the previous tenant. She went missing a few months ago. Derek's heart sank. The implications were horrifying. The deranged ex hadn't been entirely wrong. Haunted by this revelation, Derek left the city, his quest for inspiration replaced by a desperate need for peace. But some questions remained forever unanswered. Where had she been? Ethan had always been a meticulous planner. Originally from Chicago, he was now in his final year of medical school in San Francisco. The weight of exams, rotations, and endless study sessions pressed down on him. So when he received an invitation to a medical conference in Los Angeles, it felt like a much-needed escape. He had no family left in Chicago, both parents having passed when he was young. Raised by a loving aunt, she had been his bedrock. He was deeply invested in becoming a doctor, not just for himself, but to honor her sacrifices. So a trip to LA was not just about the conference. It was also a chance for him to catch up with a few old friends. After comparing hotel prices, Ethan decided to book a duplex in a quiet suburb on Airbnb. The photos showed a well-maintained property with clean rooms, modern amenities, and a decent price. The reviews, too, were mostly positive, praising the cleanliness and comfort. The only odd thing was that the host, a man named Martin, had a peculiar rule: do not access the basement. Ethan arrived in LA on a sunny afternoon. The duplex was located in a peaceful neighborhood, surrounded by tall pine trees, casting eerie, long shadows on the quiet streets. The home itself was two-storied, painted a crisp white, with a meticulously maintained garden. He rang the doorbell, and after a short wait, the door creaked open. A tall, lanky man with salt and pepper hair and deep-set, piercing eyes greeted him. "You must be Ethan," he said, in a voice as cold as winter's night. "I'm Martin." The initial encounter was slightly off-putting. Martin's handshake was clammy, and his constant gaze made Ethan uneasy. As Ethan settled into his room, he heard Martin whispering to someone. He couldn't make out the words, but it sounded tense. Shrugging it off, Ethan decided to get some rest. The next day, after attending the conference, Ethan returned to find a note on his bed. Remember, no going downstairs. It was strange, but Ethan had no intentions of breaking any house rules. However, curiosity grew as he heard sounds from the basement at night: whispers, footsteps, the sound of metal dragging. One evening, after a day of back-to-back sessions, Ethan returned to the duplex utterly exhausted. As he entered, the front door slammed shut behind him. The lights flickered. He felt a chill in the air. Realizing he forgot his conference materials in the car, Ethan tried to exit, but the door wouldn't budge. He felt trapped. Panic set in. He tried calling out to Martin, but there was no answer. He then tried his phone, but there was no signal. The sounds from the basement grew louder. An eerie tune played on an old piano, joined by soft weeping. Ethan's heart raced. With his back against the front door, he surveyed the home, searching for another way out. He remembered a back door from the kitchen. As he approached the kitchen, he noticed photographs lining the hallway. They showed various guests, presumably previous renters. But what caught his attention was the most recent photo. It was of him, taken unknowingly while he was at the conference. The paranoia heightened, and Ethan felt a shiver down his spine. In the kitchen, Ethan tried the back door, locked. Frustration and fear consumed him. The whispers grew louder, more persistent. Curiosity now combined with desperation. He needed to know what was in the basement. Approaching the door, he heard Martin's voice. "They always try to leave. They always come down." He cautiously opened the door. Down the rickety stairs, he saw a dimly lit room. Old furnishings, layers of dust, and in the center, a grand piano playing by itself. To the side stood Martin, talking to the walls. "See, they always come, just like you said." Ethan, voice trembling, spoke up. "Martin, why am I locked in? What's going on?" Martin, eyes wide and filled with tears, replied, "They tell me things. Whispers in the walls. They said you come down. They say they're trapped, just like you." Realization dawned on Ethan. Martin was suffering from extreme paranoia, likely caused by profound isolation. The duplex, with its thick walls and quiet surroundings, amplified every little noise, leading Martin to believe he was hearing whispers. "I just want to leave, Martin. Please let me out," Ethan pleaded, trying to approach the situation with empathy. Martin hesitated, then spoke with a quivering voice. "I can't. They won't let me." The standoff felt like an eternity. Ethan took a deep breath and said, "Martin, these whispers are not real. They're echoes, amplifications. I promise." The next few moments were tense. Martin's eyes darted around, torn between the conviction in Ethan's words and the perceived whispers from the walls. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the living room. Both men jumped. Racing upstairs, they found the front door open, wind howling outside. A tree branch had smashed through a window, unlatching the door in the process. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan bolted outside, breathing the fresh air and feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. Behind him, Martin stood in the doorway, a lost soul, consumed by the whispers in his mind. Ethan later reported the incident to Airbnb and urged them to get Martin some help. He checked into a hotel for the rest of his stay. Weeks after returning to San Francisco, Ethan received a handwritten letter. It was from Martin. The man had sought psychiatric help and was in therapy, battling his inner demons. The letter was filled with apologies, gratitude, and hope.